So tonight's presentation is going to be on how our government in Glastonbury works. This is our agenda for this evening. As you can see, there's quite a few items we're going to be covering. So please save your questions till the end. When we're done, we're going to have a 15 to 25-minute Q&A session. I'm going to be presenting the slides. That's me over there. And Chip Beckett is going to be answering the Q&A sessions. So a little bit of background about myself. I got involved in local politics in 2022 when I opened a website called GlastonburyVoter.com. I'm a software engineer, and I'm self-trained, and I've always just really dived into things and learned as much about them as possible. And here I'm tonight to share with you everything that I've learned about local government in the past few years. Chip has been serving on boards and commissions for 20 years and change. He has probably forgotten more about local government than I know. And one fun fact about Chip is he has gotten more votes than anybody else in Glastonbury on a per-person basis. That means for every person that's gone to a voting booth, more people voted for him than anybody else. So Chip knows what he's doing. All right. So first we're going to talk about how Connecticut's government works. So most states, actually I think this is the only state that doesn't, have county-level governments. We don't. So, while there is a Hartford County doesn't exist. Instead, all of our towns are kind of like their own little fiefdoms, right? So our town of Glastonbury, we do our own government. We have our own police force, we have our own zoning policies, we have our own educational system. Our water tastes different than the water in New Britain. If you ever wondered why that's the case, that's why. Now, there is some cooperation between different governments. That's what this is called, Connecticut Regional Council of Governments. But for the most part, we are our own people. Glastonbury is ruled by Glastonburyans. Is that the right word? Now, there is a lot of advantages and disadvantages to this policy. One of the drawbacks, as you can see here, is the median household income. So if you look at our median household income, it's $150,000 per home. It's quite high compared to, say, Manchester, which is $87,000. Now, what this means is that we're going to have better school systems. We're going to have better public service systems. We are truly blessed to live inside Glastonbury. And while there are federal programs that help to try to even this out, it doesn't really become all that even. So we're lucky to live here, and we have a number of advantages from it. So now let's talk about our town charter. There's going to be a lot of terminology in the next few sections, but this is important to cover. So what is the town charter? When you hear use this phrase. The town charter is kind of like the Constitution of Glastonbury. It defines how we're going to govern ourselves. You can find the town charter online. It's super easy to look up. Just Google Glastonbury Town Charter. It's going to pop up. There's a searchable format, so it's really easy to go through. And you'll see here this first section right there, that part 1, that's the town charter itself. Okay? That part of the document tells us how our boards are set up, how our commissions are defined. Everything that defines how Glastonbury government is structured is in that section. And that's hard to change. Occasionally you're going to hear people talk about we need to open the town charter. It requires a supermajority of the town council to change anything in the town charter, and it's a big process. You're not going to see many changes to that. I think the last time that was changed was in 1982. Okay? The rest of this is called the town code. Okay, now this covers just general laws of Glastonbury. That's a whole lot easier to change, and you see lots of changes happen to this on a regular basis. Okay, and you can search through the town code and the town charter for specific items. For example, if you want to know, hey, my neighbor's dog has been barking all night long, is that okay? You can actually go and look in here and look up dog, and it will find all the ordinances related to dog noise. And yes, it is illegal. So that brings us into the next section. We have 2 things to talk about. One is ordinances and the other is resolutions. So what is an ordinance? An ordinance is a local level law. Okay? They don't call it a law, and I really don't know why, but the technical term is an ordinance. Okay? And this is an example of what our ordinance is. This is one about curfew, which says that anyone under the age of 16 can be walking on the streets after 9 p.m. or 4 a.m. without parent or guardian, right? Otherwise, there's a fine. So these are local laws that we as Glastonburians have created. Now, the other option that you see here, the other thing we'll talk about is called a resolution. Now, a resolution is something that a body like the town council will take, which is a one-time action. So where an ordinance is consistently going to be this, the resolution is we're going to do this once. The example I have up here is a transfer of $8 million to roof repairs for the schools. Right? We're not going to be doing that every day, obviously. So laws have different levels on how they're applied. And first we have over here the federal laws, okay? And then those override state laws, and then those will override local laws. Okay, and this is why ICE can deport people in Connecticut, much to the chagrin of the Connecticut legislature, because federal laws override state laws. Likewise, state laws override local laws. As much as we would like to not have to deal with 830G, we still have to because it's a state law. Okay, now not all federal laws are enforced inside the states. For example, marijuana is banned under the Controlled Substances Act, but the state has made it legal. So you can get arrested by a federal agent, but the state doesn't do it and the federal doesn't enforce it. So it's a little bit gray area, but you see the point here. There's a layering of laws here. And if you really want to know if that dog barking is illegal or not, you actually have to go to the state and the federal laws to find that out. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, you're going to hear this phrase, is the town meeting. The town meeting happens once a year in January, and this is the process where the town manager presents the yearly budget to the town for a thumbs up or thumbs down vote. This is really a formality, I dare I say pomp and circumstance, because even if 500 people showed up and all voted no to this budget, it would still go through. The magic words you're looking for right here are expressing an opinion for the guidance of the council. You can show up to this if you want. It's nice to see, but basically just once a year we have a meeting. This will come occasionally, which is why I bring it up here. Now, this is the organizational chart of our local government, okay? And you'll see way there up at the top, the most important people in our government are you, the electors. You are the people that ultimately get to decide how our government is ran. And when you go and you vote, and some of you may have already voted this year, when you go and you vote, you're going to vote for that section at the very top there, the Board of Assessment Appeals, Board of Education, Finance, Town Council, Commission, Registered Voters, and Zoning Board of Appeals. Those are the different people that you nominate to and you elect to those different positions. Now, the town council is the ruling body of Glastonbury. The town council will then organize a large number of different commissions and boards that correlate or contact and discuss to the town council once they need to. They pass over their duties. Ultimately, the stamp of approval comes to the town council. Following that, we have the town manager, okay? And the town manager reports up to the town council. And then we have all of the different departments inside the town that report up to the town manager. So now let's talk about the town manager and the superintendent. So our town manager is Jonathan Louise. Here's a little bio of him. He's a great guy. If you ever get a chance to talk with him. Then we also have Dr. Alan Bookman. Dr. Alan Bookman has been our superintendent for many years. It's 20 years or so. And yeah, he's also a good person. I recommend chatting with him if you can. All right, so one common question, this is a question I had when I first started learning about local politics. Why do we have a town manager? Like, aren't mayors a thing? Well, yes, they are a thing, but we chose not to go with the mayor and say we went with the town manager for a number of different reasons. If a mayor is elected every other year, they're spending half their time running for office, right? Not actually doing the job of running a town or a city. So because of this, we chose to hire a professional that manages our town, called town manager. Now, another issue is a mayor might be beholden to special interests. If a bunch of people paid money to a mayor's election to get him elected, they're going to hold sway over that mayor, where nobody holds sway over Jonathan Louise. Jonathan Louise and other town managers are nonpartisan. They don't care If it's an R or a D in office, they're there just to do their job, to help give us the best town possible to live in. Okay, they also protect civil service employees for the meddling of electors. And that's actually not my writing, that's what I pulled from somewhere else. Basically, it means that somebody on town council can't go over to the department head of Parks and Rec and harass them directly. Their point of contact is Jonathan, and he acts as the interface. Okay. You hire town managers for their skill and their expertise. So instead of electing somebody who may or may not be qualified, this guy has been doing this role for decades. He's skilled and knows what he's doing. Our town manager manages 214 employees. This includes police, firefighters, our assessors, and many others. Okay, and the key thing with the town manager and why they work for government is it provides consistency from election to election. Now, likewise, we use a superintendent. Why do we use a superintendent? Because, again, the superintendent manages the school. And much like the town council interfaces with the town manager, the Board of Education interfaces with the superintendent. And almost all towns use a superintendent. I think there's 3%, that's what I found, that don't use it. The superintendent is responsible for a lot of our money, right? So 65% of our budget, 2/3 of our budget goes to paying for the schools. Right, and the superintendent is a manager of 876 employees. That's actually quite a bit. Now, our superintendent gets paid a great deal, but if you look at the salaries of CEOs for for-profit education companies that are about that size, you wind up with CEO salaries that are about as much, if not greater. We're not going to get that big of a discount whenever our superintendent retires. We will save some money because he's paid very well. But we're not going to hire somebody for 50 grand a year. We're going to hire somebody for at least 200 grand a year to take a spot. Likewise with town managers, superintendents provide that long-term consistency so our schools and our kids get the same education year after year. And the purpose of the superintendent is to implement the policies of the school board. All right, now we're going to talk about the town attorney. You don't hear much about the town attorney, but the town attorney exists and they fill a very important role because people try to sue our town. Our town is going through a lot of different types of litigation, and the town attorney represents us, the taxpayers, to protect our best interests. Okay? The town attorney is hired by the town council and technically reports to the town council, but in practicality, he works with the town manager almost every day and very rarely interfaces with the town council, and that's okay. The important takeaway here is that you know that we have a professional attorney whose job is to protect the taxpayers. The rest of the positions we're going to talk about tonight are going to be elected positions. Now, these are unpaid positions. Nobody gets paid to do this, right? The people who nominate themselves to go ahead and run for these offices or get elected for these offices do this out of the goodness of their own heart. Okay, they don't make a lot of money. In fact, we have a very strict ethics commission and ethics rule set, which states that if anybody tries to make money off of it, they will get removed from office. Okay, and this is a good thing. This is what we want. And you might ask yourselves, well, who would want to do this? This is a post made by Jake McChesky, whose last term on the town council was this Tuesday. And he posted this heartfelt message saying how much it meant to him being able to contribute to a society. And this is why I think most of the people do the work that they do, and why I think that we should really give all of our elected officials a lot of respect and credit for the effort that they put in. That's my opinion. All right, so now let's talk about the town council. The town council consists of 9 people. This is as of last week. As we just mentioned, Jake stepped down. This is the town council that is currently serving Glastonbury today. Okay, we currently have 6 Republicans on the town council, 6 Democrats and 3 Republicans on the town council. These are the powers and responsibilities of the town council. So the first thing they have to do is they get to define new ordinances. If we want to create a law stopping those crazy e-bikes, the town council has the capacity to pass an ordinance stopping e-bikes. As we mentioned earlier, the town council has the capacity to pass resolutions. So they can shut down a part of the town for the Apple Fest, right? These are actions that the town council can make. The town council will set our yearly budget. The town council will hire the town manager, and every few years that town manager's contract comes right back up. And the town council pretty much always just goes yes because Jonathan does a good job. And the final thing is the town council has the capacity to create and regulate and appoint people to boards and commissions. So when the town council elections run each year, each party can nominate up to 6 different people. So this year we've got 6 R's running, and we've got 6 D's running. Technically one of the R's is an I, but nobody's saying. And this is what it looked like in 2023. Okay. So you see, this is how many people got votes for the D's. These are the R's votes, 2023, which winds up with 6 D's getting into the office, 3 R's getting into the office. And the reason I brought this up is because one thing our government has is minority representation. So no matter what, the other party will always have at least a few people in local government. This is different than many other towns inside Connecticut. Now, one thing you might notice, this astute person will say, hey, wait a second. 43% of the people voted for Republican, but they only have 33% of the seats. Well, Glastonbury government doesn't always work. And this is one area where it's broken. Anyway, I was going backwards. Now let's talk about the Board of Education. So these are the people on the Board of Education. Okay. And in this case, we have 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And these are the powers and responsibilities of the Board of Education. So the first thing the Board of Education can do is set policies. So the Board of Education is responsible for setting the dress code, right? How students can park in the school. They don't set, you need to park here, but they set the overall policy that the administration then implements. The Board of Education is responsible for staff approval. So they get the list of all of the paraprofessionals, they get the list of all of the administrators, all the teachers, and they're the ones that get to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down on how many people we hired to do the job. Okay. They're responsible for the budget. So every year they're going through budgets, making sure that they all look good. They're responsible to hire the superintendent. And when that contract comes to an end, they're the ones that get to redo it. They're responsible for listening to recommendations by the superintendent. An example of this would be in December last year, a consulting group was hired to give us projections on how many people we're going to have at the schools over the next decade. Right? So that's a recommendation that the school board has to listen to, and then will implement policies based off of those recommendations. And finally, the school board's job is to communicate with the public. So if you have a question about the schools, you're not going to hear from the schools directly. Okay, you're going to hear from the school board. The only time you're going to hear from the schools directly is if you have a kid in the school and it's like the teacher is talking to you about your kid. With the Board of Education, the election looks like this. So in every other year, we have 4 people running. This is one of those years we have 4 people running. And then we have 6 people running. Okay, and out of that, one thing I want to mention here is the way our charter is designed, it doesn't say D's or R's in there. Right? There's nothing to stop the third party from just showing up and saying, hey, I want to go ahead and run too. Because it's just how many people get the highest number of votes in those roles. So boards and commissions. You'll notice that there's a whole lot of boards and commissions over here, all reporting up to the town council. And the reason this happens is because there's no way that a group of 9 people can handle every possible thing that this town needs. It's not possible. So out of little Chicago, we'll go here to show that. That's what all of these do, is they all kind of take the work that needs to be done to run Glastonbury and breaks it down into manageable chunks and then funnels it back up to the town council for a stamp of approval. So the first board I want to cover is going to be the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance is responsible for a couple of different things. The first thing they do is right after the town meeting, they're going to get that budget that's been presented to the town that we all gave those thumbs up and thumbs down on, and they're going to review it. They're going to check that out and make sure that everything looks good. Okay. The Board of Finance is also responsible for setting the tax rate. So after we created our budget and we figured out how much we've gotten back from our other types of revenues, such as, paying for licenses, they say, okay, well, the rest of Glastonbury needs to pony up X. That's our tax rate. And they're also responsible for certifying non-budgetary spending. So we set $500,000 we have our budget set and we need to spend an extra $500,000 because there was a disaster that caused a bunch of power lines to get knocked down like happened a few years ago. That goes to the Board of Finance. They give the thumbs up and then we can spend that money to go ahead and have the issue addressed. Their job is basically safeguards to make sure that all of our checks can be cashed. The next thing we're going to talk about is town planning and zoning, but before we can talk about that, we need to cover what is zoning. You're going to hear zoning termed a lot, and I know zoning sounds incredibly boring, and you could argue it is. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. Zoning defines where we build, okay? You don't want somebody to build a factory right next to your house. It would suck. It would be loud, it'd smell bad. So zoning prevents that from happening. We set areas in the town where you're going to have homes. You're going to have commercial. It also defines how we build. Okay, so you can't build a 4-story house. That's not in the zoning regulations. If you go and say, hey, I want to build a 4-story house, you're going to get denied and you're not going to be able to build that. Okay? The one thing I want to mention is the way this is created is we have a very rural Glastonbury. People often think about Glastonbury as a relatively big town. It is geographically, right? But let's look at this map here. Okay, so there's 2 colors. I want you to pay attention to this map. You don't have to pay attention to anything else right now. And that's this green and this white. Okay, so green is reserved land. So this is, forest area that we've earmarked is not to be developed on. Okay, and then white is rural residential. These are lots that are at least 1 acre in size, and most of the people in Glastonbury live in these rural residential areas. And it's really interesting because you think, wow, look up there, that's way so packed up there. So many people live right up there on the East Hartford line. Yeah, but if you look at the sheer number of homes out here, there's more. And that's because Glastonbury is a very rural town. Now let's zoom in a little bit just so you can get more of a deep dive on how this map works. This is on the corner, the northeast corner of Glastonbury. Okay, so here we are, right here. In fact, we're right here. Okay, this is the town center. Okay, you can see this is where the community center is. Up here is, that's Stop and Shop. Sorry, that's Stop and Shop up there. Up there's the Barnes and Noble. This is Somerset Square. What's all this? This is all marshland. Right, and you can see the marshland because if you walk out of the library, you go look past the parking lot, you can't build up there. And that's what all this says. This defines where we cannot build. The reason I bring this up is because there will be times where you'll see maybe a developer is trying to develop something in town, and if you want to know, can they develop there? You can actually go look at the zoning map and say, oh, look at that. That's a commercial. Like over here, that's a planned economics. By the way, this is like Western Boulevard. Well, it's medical offices on. All right, so now let's get back to town planning and zoning. So town planning and zoning, how does this all tie in? So TP&Z is responsible for planning the zoning. It's in the name, right? Town planning, they define how we're going to be building out our town. So the reason our town is the rural residential that you saw is because TP&Z over the past decades has set it up to be that way. Right? And that's still going on today. They recently passed a number of things called village districts, and South Glastonbury is where the most recent one was passed. And this, again, defines how our town is going to be built. They're also the zoning commission. So when you go to build a house, or if you're going to extend your house, you have to go and present your plans to TP&Z, and they're going to look at it and say, okay, are you meeting all of our regulations? So they're going to deny your 4-story home. What can you do? They're also responsible for renaming streets. They also have 2 other responsibilities. They're responsible for the Flood and Erosion Control Board. So they're the ones that make the plans to handle flooding if it happens over on the west side of town. And they don't implement those plans. They draw the plans up and let town staff handle those. They're also responsible for the municipal upkeep, to ensure that we have good, clean water. Okay, the next group we're going to talk about is the ASDRC, or Architectural and Site Design Review Committee. These people are the ones that manage those village districts that I just mentioned. Okay, so when a village district is created, this group will create this large list, right? And that large list defines how those buildings built in the village district have to look. This means that if somebody wants to build something in the Glastonbury Town Center or now in South Glastonbury, they have a very strict list of guidelines that they have to follow. Now, what this means is that if somebody lives in Manchester, they're going to get an ugly CVS that looks like this because the builder is going to build as cheaply as possible. But here in Glastonbury, we're going to get a CVS that looks like this because we have rules and regulations set up to ensure that buildings are made beautiful and match our standards. Budgets. Yay, budgets. Budgets are probably the most important thing that our local government does. Okay. And this is because budgets define what we're going to be doing, right? If we don't put money towards it, we're not going to be doing it. So budgets, again, are arguably the most time-consuming and important thing that any member of the town council and board of education does. They're also the most boring. And the first 2 years I was getting into town politics, every time budgets came up, my eyes would glaze over. I'd find something more interesting to go do. So we're not going to go deep into budgets here. We're just going to touch over on this part right here so you can get a short summary of what this looks like. So every year the town budget is going to look like this. And what you're going to see here is you're going to see revenues. So this is how much we pulled in, right? So in 2026, we're expecting to pull in 177 million taxes, right? And so this is all of our money that we're pulling in. This is what we're spending, right? So if you want to see what our spending is for our police, it's around 18 million, right? So you can go through and you can see where everything's being spent here. In education, there's 129 million. Right? So that's our biggest budget line item. This is how the budget's created. So the superintendent will give the Board of Education a budget. Okay, the Board of Education is going to kick it back and be like, no, too much. He's going to come back, give it again, and it'll get approved. People over here, we have one person here on the Board of Education, and they know the story well. Then it's going to go to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance is going to review it, and they're going to kick back some items. And then it's going to the Town Council. The Town Council will vote it up or vote it down. Our local town budget is very similar. There's just no Board of Education. So it goes straight from the town manager to the Board of Finance to the Town Council. Here's my pro tip. If you want something added or removed from the budget, don't do it. Don't try here. Don't go to the town council meeting with getting his final vote up and thumbs down and saying something. It's not going to happen. If you want to make a change, start here or here. Get earlier in the process, and your chances of making a change happen are much greater. So there's two concepts you're going to hear a lot of when people talk about the budget. Okay, the first is called the grand list. Grand list sounds very fancy. It's really just a list of all the property in Glastonbury. This includes homes, businesses, cars, boats. Anything that is qualified as taxable property is listed in the grand list. Next thing we're going to hear a lot is going to be the mill rate. The mill rate is simply your taxable rate. And I'm guessing it comes from back when people used to mill flour. But the way it works is 1 mill is equal to $1 on $1,000 of taxable assets. Okay, sounds complicated, but really not. So a 35 mill rate on a $100,000 home means you're taxed $3,500. Our mill rate's 40.56. You can take this, take your valuation of your house. I hope I have the right.
Now they started to
Google lied. Okay, yes, it's a little bit lower than that. Anyway, you can take this, figure out what your home's tax value is. All right, so how do we come up with our mill rate? This is actually really easy. What we do is we start with the budget. So we figure out that as the town, we're going to spend this much, right? And then we say, okay, well, what's our grand list? Okay, well, now we divide it by 1,000. And that gives us our mill rate. And there's a couple of advantages to this approach. Okay. The best advantage is it gives us no debt. And we don't have to go into debt if we don't want to. Because we're setting our budget ahead of time and then we're setting our tax rate, we have the advantage of setting our tax rate so we're never going into negatives, right? States and federal governments can't do that because they have to rely on income taxes or federal taxes, and those can vary year after year. So they kind of they take their best guess, right? And that's why they have to have these extra buffers in their budget where we can very carefully and specifically say we want to spend this and get taxed that. Property taxes are a progressive tax. I don't mean that in like a political term. They're a progressive tax in the sense that if you own more property, you're taxed at a higher rate. If you don't want to get taxed as much, buy a smaller house. Something that's worth of note is we have an endowment here in Glastonbury. So about 16% of our overall budget is held inside the bank. But it's not just sitting there doing nothing inside the bank. Our rainy day fund, which is about $34 million, is utilized by the Board of Finance in order to earn money off of it. So they're investing it and it's coming back with returns, and that saves taxpayers money. I didn't know about that, and I thought it was really cool. Thought you would too. There's also lots of tax credits here in Glastonbury. So we have a senior citizens tax credit. If you're on a fixed income, you can make an application every year. I don't know the exact time. I think it's in May-ish or something. Google it. And you can get a tax credit on your property taxes. And this is to ensure that senior citizens are not taxed out of their homes. There are also tax credits available for open space and performance. So if you have a giant field or a forest, you're not going to be taxed on it very much. You may get taxed like a couple $1,000s off of it over the course of a year. Or if it was residential, you'd be taxed, tens of thousands of dollars. So we don't tax open space, and that's because we want to encourage open space. And finally, there are tax credits available for veterans. Again, Google it if you want to learn more. Yes, so citizen engagement. Engaging with the different boards and commissions is incredibly powerful, and your voice matters. When you go and speak to a board, you're going to have 3 minutes to talk. Okay, and this is me talking on September 30th to the town council. Okay, now when you show up, you're going to need to state your name and address. You're going to need to state, what you support and what you don't. That's the best way to do it. Because if you go up there and you start some long-winded diatribe, they're going to lose interest. Go up there and say, I support this. Or you can ask a question. Hey, what about that? Okay? Don't expect an immediate resolution. So you might go up to the town council or the board of education and bring something up. They're not going to drop everything and address your issue right then and there. But it might get put onto the docket. It might get looked at for future use. And it's important to always be polite and respectful. Again, these people are donating their time. Why be jerks to them? So when you're going to go talk to a board, there's a couple of keys when it comes to what I call having weight, right? So new faces hold more weight. If you have never been to a board of education or a town council meeting and you're making a public comment, they're going to listen to you. They're going to listen to you a lot more than they're going to listen to me because I'm up there pretty much. Also, more people bear more weight. If 10 people show up and talk about a subject, they're going to listen, right? Now, the way to get the most importance or most key voice is to show up in person. You can't show up in person? Attend over Zoom. You can't do that? Do a written comment. But if you really want to make an impact, show up in person and bring people with you. Now, if you bring a bunch of people with you and you and 9 of your buddies show up to a town council meeting and talk about something that's very passionate to you all, don't everybody take 3 minutes talking. You're going to take 30 minutes of everybody's time and you're actually going to lose support. They're going to be like, who are these people? Why? Let's get them out of here. Right? You don't want that. Make your first point very detailed and then have everybody else say, I support Bob. Right? That's how you're going to get the most interest and most effect. This type of approach has significant impacts on our society today. Recently, there was the Addison Road Coalition. This is a group of citizens. They were concerned about the property that was going up where Good Family Farm currently is. They were concerned at the amount of extra traffic that this would generate onto Smith. They got together, talked to the town council, they talked to the developers, and they had the exit path of that property go out to Western Boulevard. They accomplished their goals, and they managed to save some of the property for land for historic use for the town. Okay. Now, this can also have a personal effect. This is my personal experience when I've gone up and talked about inclusionary zoning. I've seen some of the discussions about inclusionary zoning that I brought up get discussed by the town council and implemented. And it's really rewarding when you bring up things that you see that could be concerns that they address on the spot. Doesn't always work though. So if you go up there and you bring something up, don't get heartbroken if they just ignore you. It's going to happen. I've also seen during Board of Education meetings where parents have brought up legitimate concerns about their children, and the board has addressed them later on that night. And this is really empowering and heartful to me because it shows that, government works. There's also areas where citizens can have significant impact on our society. Okay, one of which is a ballot measure. Right now there's a ballot measure about artificial turf, and I don't want to talk about pro or for against it, but I do want to bring up that it was 10 people that went out every weekend getting signatures, and now there is a proposal that could potentially impact 34,000 people. Right? So small groups can have huge effects. In 2017, Glastonbury went from being a Republican majority town, Republican for decades, to being supermajority Democratic. And while it's easy to say Donald Trump caused this, he didn't. Donald Trump didn't go and call these people and say, hey, you need to go vote in the evening elections. It was about 20 people. 20 people going out, calling people, knocking on doors, phone banking, and pushing really hard, and switched Glastonbury from red to blue. And another 20 people could flip the town again. People can also host public gathering events. Recently, there was a Charlie Kirk Memorial and a No Kings protests. Both of those have been put on by about 10 people. Those are the organizational groups. And yet they can have significant impacts on our society. So if there's one takeaway I can get from that, it's you can make a difference. So let's review our boards and commissions. We'll wrap it up. So this is going to be kind of like a lightning round. There's a whole lot here. We're going to try to make this fast and easy. Okay, Board of Assessment Appeals. If you're unhappy with your assessment on your house, you can go ahead and contact these guys and ask them to reevaluate you. You better have a good reason, or they're going to just kick you out the door. Okay, we talked about Board of Finance. Board of Fire Commissioners are responsible for making sure that we have a volunteer fire department. The Registrar of Voters are the people that are in charge of making sure that our elections are run smoothly and well. Our registrars of voters, we've got two of them, Elizabeth and Charlie, they're both amazing. Okay, and zoning boards of appeals. So if you want to have an exception to that zoning policy that I mentioned earlier, these are the people to go talk to. So if you really do have your heart set on that 4-story house, make an appeal case to these guys, make it a good one, and they say yes. Okay, the Commission on Aging, they evaluate programs for the elderly to be held mostly at the Riverfront Community Center. The Fair Rent Commission helps to make sure that our rents are fair and just for renters. The Historic District makes sure that all of our historic houses are protected and cared for. We talked about the SDRC. The Economic Development and Commission is one of those that helps to develop economic activity. It's kind of a dead commission. What do I mean when I say a dead commission? A commission that has members but meets once a year, doesn't actually do anything. It's a dead commission. Okay. So then we have the Glastonbury Free Academy. Glastonbury Free Academy is where our old high school is. It's half a town hall. There's a group of people that does things like gymnastic events. They're just making a community set of activities for Glastonburyans. The Housing Authority implements the GHA's policy, defines the GHA's policies. So these people are pretty much the people that organize and run our public housing. And we do have some public housing like on the north side of town. And then the Building Board of Appeals, this is similar. This is where you can appeal building zones and regulations. They're not very active. And then similarly, the Great Stewart Pawnship is one of those groups that's just not very active. House of Appeals is a dead commission. Insurance Advisory Committee, that's a group of people that will try to come up with the best insurance rates for our town. They save us a lot of money. Public Building Commissions, this commission meets if we're going to be building new public buildings or expanding ones. Water Pollution Control Authority, this board will make sure that new developments have proper sewer and water. Human Relations Commissions, this is a recent commission that was created, I guess, 5 years ago or so. Make sure that there's no racism or things like that in town. They really haven't been very active lately. Personal Board of Appeals, I can't remember what they do. Recreation Commission, these people are in charge of like the Addison pool, right? So the recreational facilities. The Wells Turner Memorial Board, they're the advisory board that helps the library come up with ideas and plans. Okay. The Poet Laureate is a special position appointed by the Wells Turner Memorial Board to help promote the arts. Town Plan Center, we talked about that, and Youth and Services Family Commission. That is a group of people that help run Youth and Family Services, which offers a lot of programs for our kids. Yeah, I think I'll go through all of this. All right, so political parties. So each party will appoint people to these individual boards and commissions. So if there's something in here that you think that you might like to do or you might be good at, the path to get there is through one of the boards or one of the political parties. And you can just go up to the Democrats and Republicans and say, hey, you know what? Do you have any boards and commissions that need to be filled? And they might say, sure, we'll sign you up. And they'll put you in, because these are unpaid positions. You're volunteering your time to help our society. We're always looking for people, we being the town. Okay. Now, if an appointment has not been made by one of the political parties, the town manager has the ability to make that appointment. And often does. Like, there's one recently for the Fair Rent and Trade Commission that he's looking to fill. If you're interested in contacting the different parties, this is the Democratic Town Committee website. You can go there and go contact. You can also go to the Republican Town Committee website and make contacts there. You can also find people who are members of the party, usually serving on boards and commissions, and talk to them directly. Most of the people in the parties are very friendly. And I can't resist a good Star Wars quote. If you're interested in joining the independent party, there's an independent party. The person to contact for that is Mr. Chip Beckett right over there. Okay, now I'll hand this over to Chip and to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, BJ. That was good coverage. Forgive my voice. I hope it'll make it. I have a new grandson who decided to spread his preschool friends' thoughts with me. So, what questions can I take? Roger.
Well, the town through the years or the decades, I should say, has done things which I strongly have objected to. For example, the demolition of the other building behind the town hall. That was done without a referendum. The permission to demolish at the end of Cotton Hollow Road, a historic house, that was done without permission. And there are a variety of other ones, like the destruction of the Massa Mill during a lawsuit to protect it. It was done like a week before we're supposed to have a hearing on it. And I guess my question is, and ethics complaints go nowhere. I presume historically there's never been an ethics found guilty for anybody, but you can comment on that later. But my question is, what requires a referendum? Because a lot of things, like the demolition of the town hall in Bath, with the old academy building, was done just like that. And the only reason it was given was because it was in the water line, and yet it's at the same level of all the other buildings there.
Actually, it wasn't. It's 4 feet difference, and it was at one point became an obsolete building that nobody wanted to use. So, are you going to heat it and maintain it, or was it better to take it down? I think the answer to the referendum question is if there's not, the public doesn't obtain signatures like they are doing for the turf fields, the council can act. I think there's 30 days after an action that you can apply for a referendum, if I recall the numbers right. But
So it's the public has to file a request for a referendum.
yeah.
And is that in the regulations anywhere?
Yeah, it's part of the town charter, as I recall.
It is. Okay.
Glastonbury in particular, but Connecticut in general does not, unlike California or Florida, doesn't have common referendums. So they do have to be solicited by the public in opposition. And there's a period of time that they have to get that done before our actions become final. Joe,
Why are some of the what are those called? The one that you said was dead. Commissions. The commissions regarded as useless or they don't meet. I mean, they may be have people elected to them or appointed to them, but they don't meet and they don't do anything.
I think there's a variety of reasons, but we went to a council manager form of government in the late 1950s. So the town meeting that's admittedly shallow and a waste was left over in the charter because there was a town meeting when there was the first selectman and prior to the 1950s. I think many of those groups also were when you had a first selectman or early in the council and you had a lot of volunteer labor. But one of the things that's happened, and I left in 2021, but more so in 2025, there's a certain amount of professionalism. I think, first of all, human resource law, you read all the lawsuits about whether it's kids with IEPs in school or whether it's employees not feeling like they're treated right. You can't really wait for a volunteer commission to meet in 30 or 60 days to address those things. So they have to be dealt with professionally. So really a lot of those groups, we sunset some of them in the late teens. But probably more should be sunsetted because I think they've been functionally replaced by professionals at town hall. Now, you may not like that, and I get the point about we want small democratic government, everybody's involved. But if you think about churches or service clubs or anything else, how many people are really involved on a day-to-day basis that they're going to put in 8, 10, 12 hours a week in anything? Most people are, if they show up once every 3 months, they would consider it a big obligation. I don't mean to criticize anybody by that, but I just think the model of saying you're going to have a lot of citizen participation to weigh in on these and adjudicate things is not really present. The other thing about the town manager that I think is important to remember, because we would have discussions about, well, what happens if something happens to the town manager? Who takes over? And I think one of the problems with first selectmen and elected mayors, strong mayors, is we have a nearly $200 million budget. How many of you are prepared to run $200 million with everybody looking over your shoulder, state government and newspapers all deciding if you did everything exactly correctly? I think it's a task that's far beyond most people. And I don't mean to criticize anybody's ability, but when you talk about police, fire, public works, and education as our big groups, parks and rec, being up to speed on most of those topics so that you're proficient, I think is a real challenge. Not saying anybody couldn't do it. Certainly people rise to the occasions. Certainly people have business backgrounds that can do it. But I think a lot of times I hear people at coffee shops say you could do this or do that. I used to just walk out because I wasn't going to engage because it was quite obvious they had no idea what they were talking about and no sense of context about what the discussion was about. But you're not going to win if somebody said you shouldn't wrestle with pigs in the mud because you can't tell who's the pig. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is the hierarchy of the judicial, but not the judicial, but the law. For example, a typical thing in the 830G zoning, and we're going through right now with the state. You have, in this case, you have local people who want to see the state do something. What can we expect from our town council? Another example is the sidewalks on Main Street. There one on one side of the street and the state you want them possibly on the other side. How do you manage that, and how does
the town council and local government leverage itself against the state and the federal.
Well, you try and talk to different groups, whether it be Department of Transportation or housing or whatever. Um, the sidewalks on Main Street, the sidewalks should be on the west side. I think Dan Pennington had a good plan that would have worked. I think Department of Transportation is on live in front of it, and I'm watching it. I think they wanted to rebuild the road because they hadn't, and it was steep, and there's no drainage on it because they're putting all those concrete pipes in, and they're going all the way up almost to Chestnut Hill with drainage to prevent the ponding down at Holland Brook. And so I think that the only way they can make the project big enough to rebuild the road, the drainage system, was to shift the road over like they did. So I think that they had an ulterior motive in mind, and they've had different reasons for why, they said there's an obstruction, but I don't know what part of the 45 or 50 degree bank, immediately to your right is going to be different with a 90-degree wall. I mean, it's right there. If you run off the road, you're going to flip your car on the bank, or you're going to sideswipe the wall. So I think that was a made up reason. If I read between the lines as I watch what they've done. I think 830G, we have a problem, and I think the real problem is educational spending, because a lot of the pressure for 830G should be the fact that most new households are singles or couples, and we need housing of 1 to 2 bedrooms. But the real push for 830G was single moms with multiple kids that wanted a better education than what the city central offered. And I think that's to Connecticut's detriment. We are still based on a colonial system of property tax. It's really hard on businesses, hard on individuals that don't make a lot of money, working class, lower middle class. And I think because we've done that, we've tended to make it so that we have exclusive suburbs and poor places, and the educational system's not balanced, and people want an education for their kids. And you can see it in Glastonbury because we always, town council always wants to spend less money to work that. But what's the first thing that happens when you talk about, $123 million? If you talk about taking $500,000 outright, 0.25%, 0.3% of the budget, they will have the room filled with kindergarten parents telling you that their child will not be able to read by the 10th grade because they were deprived of that $500,000. They don't tell you they hired 4 administrators and 3 secretaries. That's so I think that's the problem. And so I think educationally, we say we're going to spend anything in the town on education, and places that don't have the discretionary income Glastonbury has, can't do that. But then Glastonbury gets lots of people that move here that, graduation's next week and the for sale sign already went up. So I think they lobby for more educational expenses that those of us that are permanent residents have to pay. Roger.
Just a quick follow on that, the 830G. The biggest problem is that it's 30%, which is nothing but throw developer well. Why did they go up with 30%? Then 100% affordability where you can locate it wherever. We'd have met the goal.
I don't know why they up with 30%, except generally in housing people want to talk about mixed income because they don't want to have the old slums that were built in the 40s and 50s when they built public housing and then everybody was poor. So I think that's part of why they said 30%. They don't want just more people living there. I don't agree with it because I think it ought to be based on the rental price. Our affordable housing is deed restricted. The rest of our market is private property. I think housing prices should be affordable, that it's rents for $1,200 a month or $1,000 or whatever your price is. It sells for whatever your price is. To me, that would be affordable as opposed to the state has to have a deed restriction on it for 40 years. Because I think it selects for large out-of-state developers to build big projects. And it says you can't build a two-family accessory dwelling unit or a guest house or a 2 or 3 family on your property, which I think was the way to generational wealth prior to the 70s. It's a
I had a question about the charter. The thing that has been updated since 1982. I think. I was curious why it was. There's not a single. Maybe there's not a single paper line. Curious, like what is like the process for since there was being made? How what?
the process is that you need, I think you need a supermajority of the council to name a redevelopment commission. Then they name a certain number of people. I think it's 8 or 9, I think, if I remember right. And then they go through and they read the charter and decide what needs to be updated or changed. And the public can also weigh in. I know people are concerned that a lot of crazy ideas can come up. I think I talked about professionalism. I mean, the fire commission sometimes has had issues with staffing and human relations, or human resources issues that the town manager's become involved with, but doesn't have any direct say. CJ Mazzocchi is always advocating to go back to the police commission, which would have the same problems. And I think it would be a giant step backwards to go to something like that personally. I think people have problems with the police or the fire department. They do come to public comment and town council and say this is a problem and why. And I think that's why we have public comment. So we certainly dealt with those issues, but I don't think those are the kinds of things that you probably want put above the headline. On top of the phone on the Hartford Courant and the New York Times. I think out of respect to individuals, you want to be a little more considerate. Yes.
The Board of Ed, you said that education thing is 65% of the budget. How is it that they get this 2% fund because they didn't do their budget correctly? I mean, I don't get to do that with my own budget or however that happens. And that the schools are spending a lot of time raising money for field trips, which to me is as educational as anything in the classroom. So that there was going to be getting spent on those kinds of things. So is that part of the charter, this 2% thing, or is that something?
No, that was a state law, and that's an ordinance that the town council passed. At first it was 1%, then it became 2%. But let's go back to the backstory of why it happened. When Richard Johnson was town manager, say the town budget was $25 million, and he would turn back $800 million of savings he got over the course of the year. And don't forget, when we set a budget, they're not spending that money till 18 months from now. So it is unlike you knowing what you're getting in 2 weeks to spend in 2 weeks. We're having to project a year and a half out for what we're going to be spending. So it's never going to be exact. But so Richard would turn back, 0.5%, 1% every year, sometimes more. The Board of Education came back one year with $5,000 out of 80-something million. Another year they came back with 150. And so it became obvious that they were going to spend the money on something in that between 16 and 18. So there was nothing left to get that back. And they kept coming back and saying, we want this or that on a CIP. And so we said, why don't you just keep your money and manage it? You can do some of your small projects. So they've done, originally I started doing sidewalks that cracked in front of the schools and things like that. I have some problems with Board of Ed. I don't think they should have built a weight training facility or a locker room necessarily out of their surplus funds. It would say to me that they had too many surplus funds. But that's my opinion as one citizen, and I have no votes on what happened. So, and I didn't have a lot of votes when I was chairman of council either, because all those kindergarten parents would be telling me why my thoughts weren't completely incorrect, short-sighted.
So, I'm kind of a newbie in town, and I think it's a very fabulous place to be. I feel fortunate to be here. But one of the things that I love about this town is very quiet things, beautiful cemeteries. And I wonder if there's there's some kind of historical maintenance in place that is part of the town government, if that's all private.
I think there's a hybrid of both. There was some neglected cemeteries about 10 years ago. The state had a thing about it. And I think there's been some effort to clean them up, like fence stones or stand them up within the October and so. And I know that's been done for the last few years, but I don't know the exact breakdown of who paid for what, who did what.
That's great to know. I will find out more. I just feel like maybe I help somebody, and it sounds like I just need to ask.
Yeah, I would start with the town manager because he can tell you because there's I think 7 cemeteries and there's a number of veterans in all of them, and so there's been some.
Like a comment and a question. I've been living here for about 12 years in Glastonbury, and the comment is Glastonbury does a great job on open space. And it seems like every council we have, that always seems to be a priority is open space. So I want to say something good here about the town because there's a lot that's said that is good about Glastonbury. The town charter. I don't know this for a fact. I thought there were. I understood that the city required once every 10 years that each town has to open up their town charter, or am I incorrect?
No, I think there was a recommendation from somebody in the legislature if that happened, but there's nothing there now. Thanks for kind of about the open space because I think since '87 when the open space was, they didn't buy a lot. But I think people have been worried about it. And as much I think as people talk about education in our town, I think the open spaces drive just as many people to come to our town as education does, and I think that that's a neglected story of a common discussion. Jen.
Thanks. Great. Mine is more welcome behind me, but to everybody in the room, the Historical Society does a terrific job of sharing about the cemeteries in town. The veterans do a tremendous job on Veterans Day of cleaning up and putting flags out at the cemetery. So it's pretty fascinating around the Veterans Day holiday to see it done. And if you have never been, maybe go to the Historical Society. I was chaperoning a 5th grade field trip about 10 years ago, and I gained more knowledge from my 5th grade field trip. It was impressive. You get to learn facts about 3 Mile Road, and it's actually at the 3 miles off the river marker, and a lot of fascinating Glastonbury facts. But if you're new to town, it's definitely worth a visit.
It absolutely is. And there's a lot of cooperation between different groups. What else can I answer?
Yeah. In the presentation, it was mentioned that Connecticut, we don't have county governments same with other states, the hierarchy of federal, state, and local, and the example of being collected on sidewalk.
Talk just a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry. I guess how does having our type of local government affect how we interface with the state, federal governments, and how does it compare to other places? And if there's anything specific about Glastonbury, you should comment on that too.
I don't think there's anything specific. When I was council chairman, that was considered to be equivalent to mayor. So I could go talk to people if I wanted. The bigger problem is if you've got a Democratic legislature or a Republican town, they may not be very interested in what you have to say, but sometimes they are. The Democrats came up with $2 billion to build upstairs in the boathouse for us. I think largely they didn't want me to run against Steve Casano again, but $2 million and say thank you. When I was chairman of the Capital Region of governments for this area, I met with Malloy a couple of times to talk about various transportation projects, public transportation. So I think you can meet with those. We also talk with our legislators. We've always had a good relationship with both our senator and our 2 or 3, representatives in the legislature. So I think you try and work that way. And the town manager certainly has relationships with all those people as well. Just a quick question. Have the idea of term limits ever been brought up at any of your time in the Glastonbury government? Not for local government. Lots of people say you should have a federal lease for the last 20 or 30 years, but and sometimes in state, but I haven't heard it in local. And I think term limits were a big thing, and then I think I think the Supreme Court overturned them as being not appropriate because Texas and a few other places had passed term limits on legislature, and they don't have any. Yeah, I liked the candidates from a couple of weeks ago, and I was very happy to see the friendship and mutual respect that both parties show each other compared to what's going on nationally. But my other question is, do you think there is actually a possibility that locally a third party could be established in the last party? Yeah, I do. For those that don't know, I left the Republican Party in 2020 over our current president. And I joined the Independent Party, and I'm chairman of that Independent Party. We have town chapters in Norwalk, Bridgeport, Stamford, Guilford. Watertown is a committee, but kind of inactive. There's some other scattered individual members. I'd like to get one in Glastonbury, but I haven't found enough people who want to do it. I can't run a local party and a state party and still work and run a farm and all that. And so, if you know people that are interested, let me know because you need at least 4. 4? Yeah. What's it? Yeah, because you have to have an officer for it. So, but I do think that the solution both to the state, because I think the town works pretty well together. They may or may not like each other personally, but they're respectful and work together. The state, they say they're bipartisan, but you only have to read the newspaper to see that that's not so true. Same with the national, but I think I view our current status as very much like the 1850s when the Whigs collapsed and the Republicans formed from the remnants of the Whigs, the anti-slavery Democrats. I think we're in a similar position. So the Republicans are a third party that became bigger and everything. And there was the populist time of the Upper Midwest in the 1890s, and that's why the Minnesota Party is the Democratic Farmer Party, because there was the Farmer Party that was so big in the 1890s. So I think a third party to either co-opt or replace one of the two major parties is the only way we're going to get out of the situation we're in.
That same vein, how would one go about getting a petition out or trying to change the structure of Board of Education? It being a 8-member board, right? It can potentially be balanced at 4-4. But how would the town, if people wanted everybody to be unaffiliated, so that politics don't run your school board?
Well, I think you'd have to change the charter, but I think the failure of Connecticut politics is we identify local candidates and voters by party registration. Texas, South Carolina, Florida, if you run in municipal races, it's just you're running on your name. And I'm sure everybody knows what party they're from. I mean, I don't think I'm not that naive, but I don't think that it's RRDD, on down the list. And they don't list you on the ballot by do you affiliate with the governor or not. So I think that that's the failure of our state politics to give people a fair shot at getting in because the parties are both very strong and they don't really want anybody that's not in the leadership on either side. And I think voters identifying by party also creates a problem because then people say, oh, it's a Democratic town or Republican town. And I'd like to think most of us could be swayed if we have a good reason to do something different. Joe.
Is it correct to say that a majority of there are more unaffiliated voters in Connecticut than there are in either party?
Yes, about 45% of the Connecticut electorate is unaffiliated. I think it's about 35%. Could be high. I think it's about 30% is Democrat, 20% is Republican, and which is the cutoff for a major party. So, except that they get a lot of votes for governor, the Republicans are pretty close to losing their majority party status or major party status. And then there's about 5% that are minor parties or something. Anything else?
Just one last question on the Board of Education in Glastonbury. Do all their funds come from Glastonbury residents, or is there state funds that also come to the Board of Education?
They get state funds through the town. There's a few small federal grants that they get. There's some small state grants. Jen can give you better numbers than I can. And then there's ECS, which we get relatively little of. For our 5,800 students, we get about $5 million. It's dropping right now. But that goes to the town and it's an offset. And so when we set the budget, we set the Board of Ed budget anticipating the ECS funding to replenish our supply. So the Board of Ed is held harmless if the state does anything with ECS. Anything else? Well, thank you. You've been a wonderful audience.